Billionaire was furious at the airport for missing his flight, until his ex-wife arrived with a smiling child. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The marble floors of Miami International Airport gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Oren Maddox paced back and forth near Gate B47. His Italian leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the polished surface, each step echoing his mounting frustration. At 38, Oren commanded attention wherever he went. His 6'2" frame carried itself with the confidence of a man who had built an empire twice. His dark hair, perfectly styled despite the early morning flight, caught the light as he ran his fingers through it for the third time in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that Flight 847 to Orlando has been delayed due to mechanical issues, the gate agent announced over the intercom. We estimate a departure time of approximately 3 hours from now. Oren's jaw tightened as he pulled out his platinum phone, the screen lighting up with 17 missed calls from his assistant. His steel gray eyes scanned the messages quickly before he dialed. "Miranda, yes, I heard," he said before she could speak. "No, I can't take a later flight. The Petrosky Industries meeting is at 2 p.m. sharp, and if we miss this window..." He paused, listening to her response. "I don't care if you have to charter a private jet. This deal is worth $40 million. A young mother nearby struggled to quiet her crying toddler while juggling a diaper bag and coffee. Oren glanced at them briefly, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. Families. Complications. He'd learned long ago that success required sacrifice, and emotional attachments were luxuries he couldn't afford. He ended the call and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. 4 years ago, he had been a different man. 4 years ago, he had believed love could conquer anything. The memory of that rainy Sunday afternoon still haunted his dreams. Thalia's face as he walked away, the sound of her heels clicking against the wet pavement as she tried to follow him, calling his name until her voice cracked. "You're making a mistake, Oren," she had said. "We can figure this out together." But he had already made up his mind. His tech company was hemorrhaging money, his investors were pulling out, and bankruptcy lawyers were circling like vultures. The woman he loved deserved stability, not a man whose empire was crumbling. So he had chosen the hardest path. He had chosen to let her go. Oren pulled his shoulders back and straightened his charcoal suit jacket. Those days were behind him now. His new company, Maddox Energy Solutions, had revolutionized renewable battery technology and was valued at over $2 billion. He had rebuilt everything, stronger and better than before. The boy who had lost everything was gone. In his place stood a man who controlled his own destiny. A commotion near the boarding area caught his attention. Passengers were gathering around the gate agent, voices rising in frustration. Oren checked his Patek Philippe watch, 8:47 a.m. If this delay stretched much longer, he would miss the most important meeting of his career. He was reaching for his phone to call Miranda again when a sound stopped him cold. A child's laughter, bright and infectious, cut through the chaos of the crowded terminal. Something about it tugged at his chest in a way that felt familiar yet impossible to place. Oren turned toward the sound, his breath catching in his throat. There, walking through the crowd of passengers with a small girl balanced on her hip, was a woman whose image had been burned into his memory for 4 years. Thalia. Her honey blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple navy dress that accentuated her graceful movements. She looked exactly as he remembered, yet different somehow. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a confidence that hadn't been there before. The little girl in her arms had the same warm brown eyes as Thalia, and she was giggling at something her mother had whispered in her ear. Oren's phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. The sound seemed to echo through his entire world as everything he thought he knew about the past 4 years began to crumble around him. Thalia looked up at the sound, her gaze meeting his across the crowded terminal. For a moment, time stopped. Her smile faded, replaced by an expression of surprise mixed with something he couldn't quite read. The little girl turned to follow her mother's gaze, and when she saw Oren, she waved enthusiastically with her tiny hand. Oren's heart hammered against his ribs as a single, devastating thought crashed through his mind. The timeline, the child's age, the familiar tilt of her head when she smiled. Everything he had sacrificed, everything he had convinced himself was for the best. What if he had been wrong about everything? What would you do if you discovered that walking away had cost you more than you ever imagined? Oren's legs moved before his mind could catch up, carrying him through the sea of travelers toward the woman who had haunted every quiet moment of the last 4 years. His pulse thundered in his ears as he navigated between rolling suitcases and impatient passengers, never taking his eyes off Thalia. She stood frozen near the departure board, her free hand instinctively tightening around the little girl's back. The child, who couldn't be more than 3 years old, continued to wave at him with innocent enthusiasm, babbling something in the sweet, nonsensical language of toddlers. Thalia. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer, barely audible above the airport's constant hum of activity. She turned fully toward him, and he was close enough now to see the subtle changes 4 years had etched into her features. There were tiny lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard-won wisdom. Her hands, once soft from her law firm's comfortable lifestyle, now bore the practical calluses of someone who had learned to do things for herself. Oren. She said his name with careful neutrality, as if she had practiced this moment in her mind countless times. I heard about your company's success. Congratulations. The formal politeness in her voice cut deeper than any accusation could have. This was not the woman who used to curl up against his chest on Sunday mornings, tracing patterns on his skin while they planned their future together. This was a stranger who wore Thalia's face and carried herself with the protective armor of someone who had been left behind. Thank you, he managed, his usual eloquence abandoning him completely. His gaze drifted to the little girl who was now studying him with the unabashed curiosity that only children possessed. She had Thalia's warm brown eyes, but there was something else in her features, the strong line of her jaw, the way her dark hair curled at the ends. This is Esme, Thalia said quietly, adjusting her daughter on her hip. Esme, can you say hello to Mr. Maddox? Hi, Esme chirped, then immediately buried her face in her mother's shoulder with a shy giggle. The sound pierced straight through Oren's carefully constructed walls. He had spent 4 years convincing himself that leaving had been the right choice, the noble choice. But looking at this beautiful child, who should have been, who might have been, how old is she? The question slipped out before he could stop it. She turned 3 last month. Thalia's voice remained steady, but he caught the slight tremor in her fingers as she smoothed Esme's hair. Her birthday is December 15th. December 15th. Oren's mind raced backward, calculating dates with the precision that had made him successful in business. 9 months before December would be March. March, when they were still married. March, when they were still trying to save everything that was falling apart around them. March, when he had been so consumed with his failing company that he had barely noticed. You were pregnant. The words came out as a statement, not a question. Thalia's composure finally cracked, just for a moment. Her lower lip trembled before she pressed it into a firm line. I tried to tell you. I called you dozens of times after you left. Your assistant always said you were unavailable. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Miranda had filtered all his calls during those first months in Toronto, following his explicit instructions to block any contact from his old life. He had told himself it was for the best, that a clean break would hurt less in the long run. But Thalia had been trying to tell him about their daughter. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. I know. There was no accusation in her tone, which somehow made it worse. You made it very clear that you didn't want to be found. Esme had grown restless in her mother's arms and was reaching toward a colorful advertisement banner hanging nearby. Thalia shifted to accommodate her daughter's movements with the practiced ease of a woman who had been doing this alone for nearly 3 years. Is she? Oren couldn't finish the question. The words stuck in his throat like shards of glass. Is she yours? Thalia completed the sentence for him, her voice soft but unwavering. What do you think, Oren? You were my husband. You were the only man I was with. The confirmation should have brought relief or joy, or any number of emotions that a father might feel upon discovering his child. Instead, Oren felt as though the ground had opened beneath his feet. Everything he had built, everything he had achieved, suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. I have a daughter, he said aloud, as if speaking the words might make them feel real. No, Thalia corrected him gently. I have a daughter. You have a very successful company and a life you chose over us. The honesty of her words was brutal in its simplicity. She wasn't trying to hurt him, she was simply stating facts. But each fact felt like another weight added to the crushing guilt that was settling in his chest. Thalia, Mama, airplane, Esme interrupted. pointing excitedly at a plane visible through the terminal windows. "Yes, baby, that's an airplane," Thalia said, her voice immediately warming as she addressed her daughter. "We're going to ride on one just like that." "Where are you going?" Oren asked, desperate to keep the conversation from ending. "Home," she replied simply. "We live in Seattle now. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency." Seattle, 2,000 miles away, a life he knew nothing about, built in his absence. He watched as Esme clapped her hands at the sight of another plane taxiing past the windows, her laughter a sound he was hearing for the first time, but would never be able to forget. "I need to catch our flight," Thalia said, glancing at her boarding pass. "Gate C-12 starts boarding in 20 minutes. She turned to leave, and panic seized him. 4 years ago, he had watched her walk away in the rain, and he had let her go because he thought it was the right thing to do. He couldn't make the same mistake twice. "Wait," he called after her, his voice carrying more authority than he felt. "Please, just wait." Thalia paused mid-step, her shoulders tensing at the desperation in Oren's voice. She turned slowly, and for the first time since their eyes had met across the terminal, he saw a crack in her carefully constructed composure. Esme had grown quiet in her arms, sensing the tension between the adults, her small hand unconsciously patting her mother's chest in a gesture of comfort. "What do you want me to say, Oren?" Thalia's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 4 years of unanswered questions. "That it's okay? That I understand why you disappeared without a trace while I was carrying your child?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Other passengers moved around them in the busy terminal, but Oren felt as though they existed in a bubble of painful honesty that no one else could penetrate. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. "My company was failing, creditors were calling every hour, and I couldn't drag you down with me. So you decided that for both of us." Thalia shifted Esme to her other hip, and the little girl immediately began playing with her mother's necklace, a simple silver pendant that Oren didn't recognize. "You decided what I could and couldn't handle, what I did and didn't deserve to know." Esme looked up at her mother's face, then turned those same warm brown eyes toward Oren. "Mama sad?" she asked with the intuitive concern of a child who had learned to read her mother's moods. "No, baby, Mama's fine," Thalia said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She pressed a kiss to Esme's forehead, and Oren watched the interaction with a hollow ache in his chest. This was what he had missed, not just the big moments, but these tiny exchanges of love and comfort that happened 100 times a day. "I called you for 3 months, Thalia continued, her voice gaining strength. 3 months, Oren. I left voicemails begging you to call me back, telling you I had something important to discuss. I sent emails to your personal account that went unanswered. I even contacted your lawyer." Oren closed his eyes, remembering the stern instructions he had given Miranda about cutting all ties with his past life. He had been so convinced that a clean break was kinder, that letting Thalia move on without him was an act of love rather than abandonment. "What did you think when I didn't respond?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "At first I thought you were angry. Then I thought maybe you were hurt and needed time." Thalia's laugh was bitter and hollow. "It took me embarrassingly long to accept that you simply didn't care enough to call back." "That's not true," Oren said urgently, stepping closer. I cared. I cared so much that it was destroying me." "Then why?" The question exploded from her with surprising force, causing several nearby passengers to turn and stare. Thalia lowered her voice, but her eyes blazed with 4 years of suppressed pain. "Why was it easier to break my heart than to trust me with the truth?" Esme had grown fussy during the intense exchange, and she began to whimper softly. Thalia immediately shifted into mother mode, bouncing gently and making soothing sounds that seemed to calm the little girl almost instantly. Watching her, Oren felt a profound sense of loss that went beyond missing his daughter's first years. He had lost the chance to see Thalia become a mother, to witness her transform from the passionate young lawyer he had married into this strong, self-assured woman who radiated competence and grace even in the middle of an emotional confrontation. "You're amazing with her," he said quietly. "I had to be." Thalia's response was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "It was just the two of us from the beginning." "Tell me about her," Oren said, surprising himself with the request. "Tell me about Esme." Something in Thalia's expression softened slightly. She looked down at her daughter, who had settled back into contentment, and was now examining Oren with curious eyes. "She's fearless," Thalia said, and for the first time, her voice held genuine warmth. Last month, she climbed to the top of the jungle gym at the park while I was talking to another mother. By the time I noticed, she was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, laughing like it was the best thing in the world. Despite everything, Aaron found himself smiling. She gets that from you. You used to climb out your dorm room window just to prove you could. She's smart too, Thalia continued as if she hadn't heard him. She knows all her colors can count to 20, and she's already trying to read. She loves books about animals, especially elephants. She paused, then added quietly, she asks about her daddy sometimes. The words hit Oren like a sucker punch to the gut. What do you tell her? I tell her that her daddy loves her very much but lives far away. Thalia's voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. I've never said anything bad about you, Oren. Whatever you think of me, I would never do that to her. I don't think badly of you, he said immediately. I think you're incredible. I always have, but not incredible enough to fight for, she replied with devastating simplicity. Before Oren could respond, the airport's announcement system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 247 to Seattle is now boarding Group A passengers at Gate C12. Thalia straightened, her moment of vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of practical efficiency. That's us, she said, adjusting her purse strap and securing her hold on Esme. Don't go, Oren said, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. Please. I know I have no right to ask, but don't get on that plane. Why? Thalia challenged him. So you can disappear again when things get complicated? So you can decide what's best for us without bothering to ask our opinion? So I can try to fix this, he said desperately. So I can try to be the father she deserves, the man you deserved 4 years ago. Final boarding call for Flight 247 to Seattle, the announcement repeated. Thalia looked toward Gate C12, then back at Oren. In her arms, Esme had begun to doze, her small body relaxed against her mother's chest in complete trust. I have a life in Seattle, Thalia said quietly. A good job, a house, friends who've helped me through the hardest years of my life. I can't just throw that away because you've suddenly decided you want to be involved. I'm not asking you to throw anything away, Oren said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was asking for. I need a chance. Please. Thalia studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he hoped she would find. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. This is my information in Seattle, she said, pressing the card into his hand. If you're serious about being in Esme's life, really serious, then prove it. Don't just say the words because you're feeling guilty in an airport. Show me that you can commit to something more important than your next business deal. She turned and walked toward the gate without looking back. Oren stood frozen, watching his daughter disappear into the boarding tunnel, the business card trembling in his hand like a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved to hold. Oren stood motionless in the middle of the terminal, staring at the now empty Gate C12 as if he could will the plane to return. The business card in his hand felt impossibly heavy, a small piece of paper that held the weight of everything he had lost, and possibly everything he could still save. Sir, are you all right? A concerned voice broke through his trance. A young airport employee was looking at him with worried eyes. You've been standing here for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Had it really been that long? Oren glanced around and realized that the gate area had mostly cleared out, with only a few stragglers waiting for connecting flights. His own flight to Orlando had probably started boarding by now, but he couldn't bring himself to care about the Petrovsky Industries deal that had seemed so crucial an hour ago. I'm fine, he managed, his voice hoarse. Thank you. The employee nodded uncertainly and moved on, leaving Oren alone with his thoughts. He looked down at the business card again. Thalia Crestwood, Senior Environmental Analyst, EPA Region 10, Seattle, Washington. Even her business card spoke to the life she had built without him. Professional, accomplished, independent. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. Miranda again, no doubt wondering why he hadn't checked in about the flight delay. With mechanical precision, he answered. Oren, thank God. Miranda's voice crackled through the speaker. I've been trying to reach you. I managed to get you on the 2:30 flight to Orlando. You'll barely make it to the Petrovsky meeting, but cancel it, Oren said quietly. There was a long pause. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Cancel the meeting. Cancel the flight. Cancel everything for the next week. Oren, this is the Petrovsky deal. $40 million. We've been working on this for 6 months. I said cancel it, Miranda. His voice carried the edge that had made him successful in boardrooms across 3 continents. Reschedule for next week if they're willing. If not, walk away. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you feeling all right? Did something happen? Something happen. If only it were that simple. Oren closed his eyes and saw Esme's curious brown eyes studying him, heard her sweet voice asking if Mama was sad. His daughter who didn't know him, who had lived 3 years without knowing she had a father who would have moved mountains for her if he had known she existed. I need you to book me a flight to Seattle, he said, surprising himself with the decision. Tonight, if possible. Seattle? But sir, we don't have any business interests in... This isn't business, Miranda. This is personal. The words felt foreign in his mouth. For the past 4 years, everything had been business. Every decision had been calculated. Every relationship had been transactional. Every emotion had been carefully compartmentalized and filed away. But standing in this airport, holding a business card that represented the family he had abandoned, Oren felt the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crumble. I'll need a hotel reservation as well, he continued. Something nice, but not ostentatious. And Miranda, I need you to clear my calendar for the foreseeable future. Sir, with all due respect, you have the Henderson acquisition review on Thursday, the board meeting on Friday, and the investors' dinner on... Delegate what you can, postpone what you can't. I trust your judgment. For how long? Miranda's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Oren, you haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe a week. Maybe longer. After ending the call, Oren walked slowly toward the exit, his mind racing. What was he doing? He had built his new empire on discipline, on never letting emotions cloud his business judgment. He had scheduled his life down to 15-minute increments, optimized every decision for maximum efficiency. Flying to Seattle on a whim to chase after a woman who had every right to hate him was not just impractical, it was completely unlike the man he had become. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe the man he had become wasn't the man he wanted to be. The automatic doors slid open, and he stepped into the humid Florida air. Palm trees swayed in the afternoon breeze, and tourists hurried past with sunglasses in vacation excitement. It struck him how different this was from what Esme was seeing right now. Clouds and mountains and the promise of rain. A different world entirely, one he had never been part of. His phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Flight to Seattle departing at 8:45 p.m. Hotel Andra downtown, reserved for 1 week. Sir, please call me if you need anything. 8:45. That gave him 6 hours to figure out what he was going to say when he saw Thalia again. 6 hours to plan an apology that could somehow account for 4 years of absence, for missing his daughter's birth, her first steps, her first words. As he walked toward the taxi stand, Oren caught his reflection in the glass doors of the terminal. He looked like what he was, a successful businessman in an expensive suit, polished and controlled and completely out of his depth when it came to matters of the heart. But beneath the surface, he could feel something stirring that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the calculated confidence that carried him through corporate negotiations or the cold determination that had rebuilt his fortune. It was something more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. It was hope. The taxi driver looked at him expectantly as he slid into the back seat. Where to? Oren was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question that went far deeper than transportation. Where was he going? Toward a future he had never imagined. Toward a woman who had every reason to shut the door in his face, toward a little girl who might never see him as anything more than a stranger. Downtown Miami, he said finally. I need to buy some things before I catch a flight. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Oren looked back at the airport one more time. Somewhere above those clouds, Talia and Esme were flying toward a life that had been built without him. But for the first time in 4 years, he was going to fight for something that mattered more than money or success or the approval of investors. He was going to fight for his family. The Seattle morning greeted Oren with a gentle drizzle that seemed to blur the edges of everything. The towering evergreens, the distant mountains, the glass and steel buildings that stretched toward a pewter sky. He stood at the window of his hotel room on the 14th floor, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and watching the city wake up below him. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Esme's face, heard her innocent voice asking if Mama was sad. The weight of 3 years of missed bedtime stories, missed holidays, missed moments pressed against his chest like a physical ache. On the mahogany desk behind him lay the fruits of his previous evening's shopping expedition. A plush elephant, Thalia had mentioned Esme loved elephants, and a collection of children's books he had spent an hour selecting with the help of a patient bookstore employee. Now in the sober light of morning, they seemed like pathetic offerings, inadequate tokens that couldn't possibly bridge the chasm he had created. His phone buzzed with yet another message from Miranda, but he ignored it. The corporate world that had consumed every waking moment of his life for 4 years suddenly felt as distant as another planet. There was only one thing that mattered now, and she lived somewhere in this misty city with her daughter, their daughter. Oren had memorized Thalia's address from her business card, cross-referencing it with property records he had accessed through his legal contacts. She lived in the Wallingford neighborhood, in a modest 2-bedroom house with a small garden. The thought of her creating a home, of Esme taking her first steps in rooms he had never seen, made his throat tight with emotion he didn't quite know how to process. He showered and dressed carefully, choosing dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater instead of his usual business attire. The man in the mirror looked younger somehow, more like the person he had been before success had hardened him into someone who measured worth in quarterly reports and market share. The drive to Wallingford took 20 minutes through streets that gleamed wet in the morning light. Oren found himself studying the neighborhoods they passed. Coffee shops where Thalia might grab her morning latte, parks where Esme might play on swings, libraries where they might spend rainy Saturday afternoons reading together. These were the details of a life he had forfeited, moments he could imagine but had never lived. Number 4247, Meridian Avenue, was a charming craftsman-style house painted sage green with white trim. A small garden bloomed in the front yard despite the season, and a child's tricycle sat on the covered porch next to 2 pairs of rain boots, one adult-sized, one impossibly tiny. The sight of those little yellow boots nearly undid him. Oren sat in his rental car for 10 minutes, gathering courage he hadn't needed since he was 25 and asking Thalia to marry him. What if she refused to see him? What if she called the police? What if Esme was frightened of the strange man who claimed to be her father? Finally, he forced himself out of the car and walked up the stone path to the front door. The elephant and books felt clumsy in his hands as he rang the doorbell, its cheerful chime echoing inside the house. Footsteps approached, light and quick, and then the door opened to reveal Thalia in yoga pants and an oversized University of Washington sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked younger than she had at the airport, more relaxed, until she saw him standing on her porch. Oren. Her voice was flat with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "You said to prove I was serious," he said simply. "So I'm here. I meant call first, maybe send an email. I didn't mean show up at my house unannounced." She glanced behind her, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed. "Esme is having breakfast. You can't just—" "Mama, who is it?" a small voice called from inside the house. Thalia closed her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. "Just a friend, baby. Eat your cereal." "I brought her something," Oren said quietly, holding up the elephant. "And some books. You said she likes to read." "You can't buy your way into her life," Thalia said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at the elephant with an expression he couldn't read. "I know that." He set the gifts down on the porch railing. "I'm not trying to. I don't know what I'm trying to do. I just know I can't get back on a plane and pretend I never saw her." Thalia wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture he remembered from their marriage whenever she was trying not to show how much something had hurt her. "You're 4 years too late for this conversation, Oren." "I know, but I'm here now." "For how long?" The question came out sharp and bitter. "Until your next business crisis? Until some merger requires your attention? Until being a father becomes inconvenient again?" "There is no business crisis," he said. "I canceled a $40 million deal to be here." That stopped her. Thalia stared at him with something approaching shock. The Oren she had known would have moved mountains before missing an important business deal. "Mama, I'm done." Esme's voice carried through the partially open door, followed by the sound of small feet pattering across hardwood floors. "Stay in the kitchen, please," Thalia called back, but it was too late. The door swung open and Esme appeared, syrup somehow smeared on her cheek and her dark hair escaping from tiny pigtails. "Oh," she said when she saw Oren, her eyes widening with recognition. "Airplane man." Despite everything, the tension, the fear, the overwhelming uncertainty, Oren found himself smiling. "Hello, Esme. Did you bring me the elephant?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed, pointing at the plush toy on the railing. "Esme, we don't ask people for things." Thalia said automatically, but she was watching Oren's face with careful attention. I did bring it for you, Oren said, kneeling down to Esme's eye level. Do you like elephants? They're my favorite. Mama read me a book about baby elephants. They hold their mama's tail with their trunk so they don't get lost. She reached for the elephant, then looked up at her mother for permission. Thalia hesitated, then nodded slowly. What do you say? Thank you, Esme said solemnly, clutching the elephant to her chest. What's his name? I don't know, Oren admitted. What do you think it should be? Esme studied the elephant seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. Peanut, she announced finally. Because elephants like peanuts and he's gray like one. Peanut is a perfect name, Oren said, and meant it completely. Esme, go put Peanut in your room and wash your face, Thalia said gently. We need to get ready for daycare. Can Airplane Man come see my room? Esme asked hopefully. Not today, sweetheart, maybe. Thalia's voice trailed off as she looked at Oren. Maybe another time. Esme nodded with the easy acceptance of childhood and skipped back inside, already chattering to Peanut about all the other toys he was going to meet. Alone again on the porch, Thalia and Oren stood in silence, broken only by the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Finally she spoke. She needs stability, Oren. Consistency. She needs people who show up when they say they will and don't disappear when life gets complicated. I understand, he said quietly. Do you? Thalia challenged. Because that little girl in there has never had a father. She's never even asked why other kids have daddies and she doesn't. She's accepted that it's just her and me against the world. If you want to change that, if you really want to be part of her life, then you need to understand that there are no takebacks. There are no trial runs. Either you're all in, or you walk away now and never come back. The ultimatum hung between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse entirely depending on his next words. Oren thought about his company, his perfectly orchestrated life, the safety of emotional distance he had cultivated so carefully. Then he thought about Esme naming her elephant Peanut, about 3 years of bedtime stories he would never read, about a little girl who held onto elephant tails so she wouldn't get lost. I'm all in, he said. 3 weeks had passed since that morning on Thalia's porch, and Oren was beginning to understand the vast difference between declaring himself all in and actually living it. He sat in a child-sized plastic chair at Tiny Tot's daycare, his knees practically touching his chin, watching Esme show him her finger painting with the pride of a master artist, unveiling her greatest work. This is you, she announced, pointing to a tall brown figure that looked more like a tree than a person. And this is me and Mama and Peanut having a picnic. It's beautiful, Oren said, and meant it completely. Can I keep it? Esme nodded enthusiastically, already moving on to show him the block tower she had built earlier. Her easy acceptance of his presence still amazed him. Children, he was learning, were remarkably adaptable when adults didn't complicate things with their own baggage. It was the adults who were proving more challenging. Daddy Pickup, Miss Jennifer, the daycare teacher, had asked when he'd arrived that afternoon. She was young, probably fresh out of college, with the patient smile that all preschool teachers seem to master. Not exactly, he'd replied, the word daddy hitting him like a physical weight. It's complicated. And it was complicated. In the past 3 weeks, he had learned that parenting wasn't a skill you could acquire in a boardroom or master through strategic planning. It was messy and unpredictable and required a kind of patience that had nothing to do with closing deals or managing quarterly projections. He had also learned that Thalia had built a life so full and purposeful that his absence hadn't left the gaping hole he'd somehow expected. She had friends, good friends who gathered for weekend barbecues and took turns watching each other's children. She had neighbors who knew Esme's name and asked about her scraped knees. She had a community that had embraced both mother and daughter with the kind of warmth he'd forgotten existed. Oren? Thalia's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the daycare doorway, still in her work clothes, a navy blazer and crisp white shirt that made her look every inch the accomplished professional she'd become. But her expression was guarded, the way it had been for most of the past 3 weeks. Mama! Esme launched herself from her chair and into Thalia's arms, chattering immediately about her day. Oren came to see my painting and we read 3 books, and I showed him how I can write my name. That's wonderful, baby, Thalia said, smoothing Esme's hair with automatic tenderness. Her eyes met Oren's over their daughter's head. Could I speak with you for a moment? Outside? The tone made his stomach tighten. Nothing good ever followed that particular request. He nodded and followed her out to the daycare's small playground, where Seattle's perpetual drizzle had left the swings glistening and empty. "We need to talk," Thalia said without preamble. "This arrangement isn't working." "What do you mean?" Oren asked, though he suspected he knew exactly what she meant. "You've been here every day for 3 weeks. You're living in a hotel. You've apparently put your entire business on hold, and you're treating this like some kind of extended vacation." She crossed her arms, a gesture he recognized as her preparing for battle. "That's not sustainable, Oren. That's not real life. I'm trying to get to know my daughter," he said defensively. "By hovering, by showing up at daycare pickup like some kind of part-time volunteer." Thalia's voice was getting sharper, drawing attention from a few parents collecting their own children. She lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. "Esme is starting to expect you every day. What happens when you get bored of playing house and go back to your real life?" "This is my real life," he insisted. But even as he said it, he could hear how it sounded. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from investors, board members, employees who needed decisions only he could make. His company was running on autopilot, and autopilot was never a long-term strategy. "Is it?" Thalia challenged. "Because yesterday your assistant called me." "Did you know that?" "She wanted to know when you'd be returning to work because apparently you have a board meeting on Thursday that's been postponed 3 times. Oren's jaw tightened. "Miranda shouldn't have called you. She's worried about you. She said you've never taken more than a long weekend in 3 years, and now you've been gone almost a month with no return date." Thalia stepped closer, and he could smell her familiar perfume mixed with the coffee she'd probably been drinking all afternoon. "She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." "Maybe I am," he said quietly. "Maybe realizing I have a 3-year-old daughter I've never met counts as a breakdown. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, Oren." For the first time, Thalia's voice softened slightly. "You can be part of her life without abandoning everything else. But you have to figure out what that looks like. Because this," she gestured toward the daycare, toward the liminal space they'd been occupying for weeks. "This isn't a life. It's just postponing the inevitable decision." A car pulled up to the curb, and Oren recognized the driver as Rebecca, one of Thalia's closest friends. Rebecca had made it clear from their first meeting that she considered him somewhere between a flight risk and a natural disaster, and her expression as she got out of the car suggested her opinion hadn't improved. "Hey, Thal," Rebecca said, acknowledging Oren with a curt nod. "Ready for dinner? Marcus is making his famous lasagna and the kids are dying to see Esme." "Almost," Thalia said. "Just give us a minute." Rebecca looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Thalia said quickly. "We're just discussing schedules." But Oren could see that everything wasn't fine. It was Thursday evening, and Thalia was taking Esme to dinner with friends who had been there for every birthday, every scraped knee, every milestone he'd missed. He was the outsider here, the complication in a life that had been running smoothly without him. "Go," he said suddenly. "You have plans. I don't want to keep you." "Oren, no, you're right. I need to figure out what I'm doing here." He looked toward the daycare where he could see Esme through the window, carefully putting on her tiny raincoat with the concentration of someone performing surgery. I need to figure out how to be her father without losing everything else that makes me who I am." "Who are you?" Thalia asked quietly. "Because I'm not sure you know anymore." The question hit him like a physical blow. 4 years ago, he had been Oren Maddox, struggling entrepreneur with big dreams and a loving wife. Then he'd become Oren Maddox, successful CEO who'd sacrificed everything for his ambition. Now he was trying to be Oren Maddox, father and possibly something more. But he had no idea how to integrate those different versions of himself. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to find out." Esme emerged from the daycare building, her face lighting up when she saw the assembled adults. "Rebecca!" she called, running toward her mother's friend with the unguarded affection that came so naturally to children. "Hey, little one," Rebecca said, scooping Esme up in a hug. "Ready for some of Marcus's cooking?" "Yes, and I want to tell him about Peanut and how Oren taught me to play chess," Esme chattered excitedly, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult tension surrounding her. Oren watched this exchange, noting how easily Esme moved between the adults in her life, how secure she seemed in their affection. She had never known a world where love was conditional or temporary, never learned to protect her heart the way he had. That innocence was something worth protecting, even if it meant stepping back to preserve it. "I should go back to Miami," he said suddenly, the words surprising even him. "Just for a few days. Handle some things that can't wait." Thalia studied his face carefully. And then I come back, but I do it right this time. I find a way to be her father that doesn't require me to pretend I don't have responsibilities elsewhere. That would be good, she said, and he caught something in her voice that might have been relief. Esme needs consistency, but she also needs to understand that people can care about her even when they're not physically present. Can I say goodbye to her? He asked. Thalia nodded, and he walked over to where Esme was animatedly describing her finger painting to Rebecca. When he knelt down beside her, she threw her arms around his neck with the uninhibited affection that still took his breath away. Are you coming to Marcus's house? She asked hopefully. Not tonight, sweetheart. I have to go away for a little while, but I'll be back soon. Promise. The word was muffled against his shoulder, but he heard the uncertainty underneath it, the first crack in her easy trust. I promise, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. And when I come back, maybe we can have our own adventure. Just you and me and Mama. Esme pulled back to look at his face, studying him with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand adult complexities. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but don't forget about me. The words were like a knife to his chest. Never, he said fiercely. I could never forget about you. As he walked back to his rental car, Oren could hear Esme's laughter mixing with the voices of people who had loved her since birth. He had work to do, not just in Miami, but on himself. He needed to figure out how to be the father she deserved without losing the man he'd fought so hard to become. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a plan that extended beyond the next day, the next visit, the next fumbling attempt to insert himself into a life that had flourished in his absence. He had a future to build, and this time, he wasn't going to do it alone. The 42nd floor of the Maddox Energy Solutions building offered a commanding view of Miami's skyline, but Oren found himself staring at his phone instead of the glittering cityscape beyond his office windows. The screen displayed a photo Thalia had sent that morning. Esme at the Seattle Zoo, standing in front of the elephant exhibit with Peanut clutched in her arms, her face bright with wonder. She insisted on bringing Peanut to meet the real elephants, Thalia's accompanying text had read. She told them all about her daddy who lives far away but calls every night. Every night for 2 weeks now, ever since he'd returned to Miami to handle what Miranda had diplomatically called urgent corporate matters. The calls had become the highlight of his days. 20 minutes of Esme's chatter about her adventures, her new words, her endless questions about why airplanes flew and where clouds came from. Last night she'd sung him a song she'd learned at daycare, her small voice earnest and slightly off-key through the phone speaker. Sir? Miranda's voice from the doorway interrupted his thoughts. The Henderson team is here for the acquisition review. Oren looked up, momentarily disoriented. The Henderson acquisition? A renewable energy startup in California that would expand their West Coast operations significantly. 6 months ago, this meeting would have consumed his thoughts for weeks. Now he had to actively remember the details. Give me 5 minutes, he said, setting his phone face down on the polished mahogany desk. Miranda hesitated, an unusual display of uncertainty from his normally unflappable assistant. Sir, if I may, you seem distracted lately. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Oren replied automatically, then paused. Miranda had been with him for 3 years, had seen him through every crisis and triumph since he'd rebuilt his empire. She deserved better than a dismissive non-answer. Actually, it's complicated. The situation in Seattle? She asked gently. When his eyebrows rose in surprise, she smiled. You talk to someone every night at 8:30 Pacific time. You've never missed a call, even during the Petrosky negotiations. It doesn't take a detective to figure out that someone is important. Oren studied his assistant's face. Sharp, intelligent, surprisingly perceptive. Her name is Esme, he said quietly. She's 3 years old, and she's my daughter. If Miranda was shocked by the revelation, she hid it well. And her mother? Is someone I should have fought for a long time ago. Miranda nodded slowly, processing this information with the same methodical approach she brought to everything. The calls make sense now, and the change in your schedule, the way you've been handling meetings differently. She paused. You're trying to leave space for them. Is it that obvious? To someone who's watched you work 18-hour days for 3 years, yes. Miranda moved closer to his desk, her expression serious. Sir, if I may offer some unsolicited advice? Please, you can't live in 2 places at once, not indefinitely. Whatever you're trying to prove to yourself or to them, you need to make a decision before it tears you apart. Before Oren could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made his heart skip. Thalia. She never called during work hours, always careful to respect the boundary between his professional obligations and their tentative new arrangement. I need to take this, he said, already answering. Thalia, is everything okay? Oren. Her voice sounded strained, distant. I'm at the hospital. Esme is fine, she added quickly. But she had an accident at daycare. She fell off the monkey bars and broke her arm. The words hit him like a physical blow. His daughter was hurt, scared, in pain, and he was 2,000 miles away looking at acquisition reports. Is she? How bad is it? Clean break, the doctor says. She'll need a cast for 6 weeks. Thalia's voice was steady, but he could hear the exhaustion underneath. She's been asking for you. She wants to know why you can't come hold her hand while they put the cast on. I'm getting on a plane, Oren said immediately, already reaching for his laptop to book a flight. Oren, no, you don't need to. Yes, I do. He was already standing, already moving toward the door. Tell her I'm coming, okay? Tell her Daddy's on his way. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Daddy? Thalia repeated softly. She called me that last night. On our call. She said, "Good night, Daddy," and I nearly dropped the phone. His voice caught slightly. I know I haven't earned it yet, but you have earned it, Thalia interrupted, surprising him. Maybe not the way you planned, but you've been showing up, Oren. Every night at 8:30. She counts on those calls now. I'll be there in 6 hours, he promised. After hanging up, Oren turned to find Miranda standing in the doorway with 3 men in expensive suits, the Henderson acquisition team. Their faces wore the particular expression of executives who had traveled across the country for a meeting that was apparently not going to happen. Gentlemen, Oren said, his mind already calculating flight times and connection schedules. I'm afraid we need to postpone this meeting. Something urgent has come up. Mr. Maddox, the lead executive said, clearly struggling to maintain professional composure. We've been preparing for this meeting for months. Our board is expecting a decision by Friday. And you'll have one, Oren replied, already shrugging into his jacket. Miranda, reschedule for Monday. If that doesn't work for Henderson, we'll conference call from Seattle. Seattle? The executive looked confused. I thought Maddox Energy was strictly East Coast operations. Not anymore, Oren said, the words surprising even him. Miranda, I need you to book me a flight to Seattle. Tonight, if possible. Sir, she said carefully, what about the board meeting tomorrow? And the investors' dinner on Friday? These have been scheduled for months. Oren paused at his office door, looking back at the room that had been the center of his universe for 4 years. The mahogany desk where he'd made million-dollar decisions, the windows overlooking the empire he'd built from nothing, the awards and recognitions that proved he'd succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. It was everything he'd thought he wanted, everything he'd sacrificed so much to achieve. But none of it mattered if his little girl was lying in a hospital bed asking why her daddy couldn't come hold her hand. Cancel them, he said simply. Cancel them? Miranda's voice rose slightly. Sir, the board meeting alone represents— I know what it represents, Oren interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. And I know what canceling it could cost. But there's something that costs more, and that's letting my daughter think her daddy doesn't care enough to be there when she needs him. The Henderson executives exchanged glances that clearly said they thought they were witnessing a mental breakdown. Maybe they were right. Maybe walking away from millions of dollars to comfort a 3-year-old with a broken arm was insane by corporate standards. But for the first time in 4 years, Oren felt like he was making a decision with his heart, instead of his calculator, and it felt surprisingly right. Miranda, he said, I want you to set up a Seattle office. Something small to start, but legitimate. If I'm going to be spending time there, and I am, then Maddox Energy is going to have a presence there too. A satellite office? She asked, already taking notes with the efficiency that made her invaluable. A family office, he corrected. Somewhere I can work when I need to be close to the people who matter most. As he headed for the elevator, Oren's phone buzzed with a text from Thalia. She picked purple for her cast. Says it matches Peanut's ears. He smiled despite everything. The canceled meetings, the confused investors, the empire that would have to run itself for another few days. His daughter had broken her arm and chosen a purple cast to match her stuffed elephant. She was 3 years old and braver than most of the executives he knew, and she was waiting for her daddy to come home. The elevator doors closed, carrying him away from the 42nd floor and toward the airport, toward Seattle, toward a little girl who had just taught him the most important business lesson of his life. Some deals were worth more than money, and some deadlines mattered more than quarterly profits. The most important meeting of his career was waiting for him in a pediatric ward, and he'd be damned if he was going to be late. The automatic doors of Seattle Children's Hospital swooshed open at 11:47 p.m., and Oren rushed through them still wearing the business suit he'd put on 14 hours earlier in Miami. His hair was disheveled from the frantic journey, 2 connecting flights, a sprint through Denver International Airport, and a white-knuckled taxi ride through Seattle's rain-slicked streets. The pediatric wing was quieter at this hour, with soft lighting and cheerful murals that seemed surreal after the sterile urgency of his cross-country race. A young nurse at the reception desk looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from routine helpfulness to concern at his obvious distress. "I'm looking for Esme Crestwood," he said, trying to catch his breath. "She broke her arm this afternoon. I'm her father." The words still felt foreign on his tongue, but saying them aloud in this place, under these circumstances, made them feel more real than they ever had before. "Room 314, the nurse said kindly. "Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Turn right. But visiting hours ended at 9, so—" "Please," Oren interrupted, desperation bleeding into his voice. "I flew here from Miami. She's been asking for me." The nurse studied his face for a moment, perhaps recognizing the particular anguish of a parent who had been too far away when their child needed them. "I'll call up to the floor," she said finally. "Let them know you're here." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless, each floor ding echoing in his chest like a countdown. When the doors finally opened, he saw Thalia immediately. She was curled up in an uncomfortable-looking chair outside room 314, still wearing the clothes from her morning work presentation, her hair falling out of what had once been a neat bun. She looked up as he approached, and the exhaustion in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "You came," she said, and there was something in her voice. Surprise, relief, gratitude, that made his throat tight. "Of course I came." He knelt beside her chair, noting the coffee stains on her blazer and the way her hands trembled slightly from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "How is she?" "Scared. Tired. The pain medication makes her groggy, but she keeps waking up asking if you're here yet." Thalia rubbed her eyes, smearing mascara she'd probably applied 12 hours ago. "The doctors say the break was clean. 6 weeks in the cast, then physical therapy. Can I see her?" Thalia nodded toward the partially open door. "She finally fell asleep about an hour ago, but—" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "She'll want to see you when she wakes up." Oren pushed the door open slowly, his heart hammering as he stepped into the dimly lit room. Esme looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. Her left arm was encased in a purple cast that seemed enormous against her tiny frame, and Peanut the elephant was tucked securely under her good arm. Someone, probably a nurse, had drawn flowers and stars on her cast with colorful markers, and there was a stack of get-well cards on the bedside table from her daycare classmates. The sight of this evidence of her life, her community, her world that existed completely independent of him, made his chest ache with a complex mixture of gratitude and loss. He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down carefully, not wanting to wake her. In sleep, she looked even more like Thalia, the same delicate features, the same peaceful expression, but there were traces of himself, too, in the stubborn set of her jaw and the way she frowned slightly, even in dreams. "Daddy?" The word was barely a whisper, but it startled him. Esme's eyes had fluttered open, and she was looking at him with the confused expression of someone emerging from medicated sleep. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, reaching out to smooth her hair. "I'm here. You came." She said it with such wonder, as if his presence was a miracle she hadn't quite believed would happen. "Of course I came. When Mama told me you were hurt, I got on the fastest airplane I could find." "It hurts," she said, looking down at her cast with a mixture of fascination and dismay. "I know it does. But you're being so brave. The purple cast looks beautiful, just like Peanut's ears." That earned him a small smile. "The doctor let me pick the color. And look," she pointed to the decorations on her cast with her good hand. "Nurse Katie drew flowers." "They're beautiful," Oren said, and meant it completely. "Can I sign your cast?" Esme's eyes widened with excitement. "Yes, Mama signed it, and Miss Jennifer from school, and Rebecca wrote her name in big letters." Thalia appeared in the doorway, holding a black marker. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing it to him. Oren took the marker, his fingers brushing against Thalia's for a moment. Their eyes met, and he saw something there he hadn't seen in weeks. A softening, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, He was learning what it meant to put someone else's needs before his own. "What should I write?" he asked Esme. "Write that you love me," she said with the directness that only children possessed. Oren's hand trembled slightly as he uncapped the marker. In careful block letters, he wrote on the purple fiberglass, "To my brave girl, Esme, Daddy loves you more than all the stars. Daddy, more than all the stars," Esme repeated dreamily, already fighting the pull of the pain medication. "That's a lot." "It's exactly the right amount," Oren said, capping the marker. "Now do you think you can sleep? It's very late and you need rest to help your arm get better. Will you stay?" The question was asked with such hope that it nearly broke his heart. "If Mama says it's okay, I'll stay right here until morning." Esme looked toward Thalia, who nodded. "Daddy can stay," she confirmed, "but you need to sleep now." "Okay." Esme settled back against her pillow, but her good hand reached out toward Oren. "Will you hold my hand? It makes the hurt go away." Oren took her small hand in his, marveling at how perfectly it fit, how natural the gesture felt despite being so foreign. "Always," he promised. "Whenever you need me to, I'll hold your hand." Within minutes, she was asleep again, her breathing even and peaceful, but Oren didn't let go of her hand, afraid that releasing it might somehow break the spell of this moment, his daughter trusting him completely, depending on him to keep the hurt away. Thalia had settled into the other chair beside the bed, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while watching their daughter sleep. "Thank you," Thalia said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. "For what?" "For coming. For dropping everything and getting on a plane." She looked at him across the small space between their chairs. "The Oren I married would have done the same thing. I wasn't sure the Oren you'd become would remember how. I almost didn't," he admitted. "For about 30 seconds I thought about the meetings I was missing, the deals that might fall through, but then I realized that none of that matters if she thinks I don't care enough to be here when she needs me." "She was so brave today," Thalia said, her voice thick with emotion. "When it happened, she didn't cry until they put her in the ambulance. And you know what she said to me while we were waiting for the x-rays?" "What?" She said, "Don't worry, Mama. Daddy will come. He promised he wouldn't forget about me." Thalia wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've spent 4 years teaching her to be independent, to not need anyone except me, but she needed you today, and somehow she knew you'd come." Oren looked down at his sleeping daughter, at their joined hands, at the purple cast that would remind them both of this moment for weeks to come. "I meant what I wrote," he said quietly. "I love her more than all the stars. I love her more than anything I've ever built or achieved or accumulated." "I know," Thalia said. "I can see it. The way you look at her, the way you rushed here tonight. It's not obligation or guilt. It's love. I love you too." The words slipped out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a bridge he wasn't sure was ready to be crossed. Thalia was quiet for so long he began to think she hadn't heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know," she said again. "But love was never our problem, Oren. Trust was. The belief that we were stronger together than apart. Are we?" he asked. "Stronger together?" Thalia looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully between them, her small hand anchored in her father's larger one. "I'm beginning to think we might be," she said. "But it's going to take time. And work. And proof that this version of you, the one who cancels $1,000,000 meetings to hold his daughter's hand, is here to stay." "He is," Oren said with quiet certainty. "He's not going anywhere." Outside the hospital windows, Seattle slept under its blanket of rain clouds. But inside room 314, a family was slowly, carefully learning how to be whole again. One held hand, one whispered promise, one brave little girl at a time. 2 months later, Oren stood in the kitchen of his newly rented house in Wallingford, 3 blocks from Thalia and Esme, trying to flip pancakes without burning them. The cast had come off Esme's arm the previous week, leaving behind a pale line of skin and a collection of stories she told to anyone who would listen about her purple adventure. "Daddy, they're smoking," Esme announced from her perch on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs and pointing at the pan with the authority of a seasoned cooking critic. "I see that," Oren said, quickly flipping what had once been a pancake and now resembled something closer to abstract art. "Maybe we should stick to cereal for breakfast." "No way. Mama says you have to practice to get good at things." Esme reached for the syrup bottle, which Oren quickly moved out of her reach. She practiced law for years before she got good at it. The mention of Thalia made Oren's chest tighten in the familiar way it had for the past 8 weeks. They were something. Not together, not exactly, but not apart either. They had dinner twice a week. Sometimes the three of them, sometimes just him and Esme. They attended school events together, coordinated schedules with the ease of longtime partners, and navigated the complex territory of co-parenting with surprising grace. But they hadn't kissed. They hadn't talked about the future beyond next week's plans. And Oren still went home alone every night to his rental house with its pristine guest bedrooms and empty refrigerator that Esme regularly declared boring. The doorbell rang and Esme immediately perked up. "That's Mama. She said she'd come early to help with breakfast." But when Oren opened the door, it wasn't Thalia standing on his porch. It was a woman he'd never seen before. Tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of pearls that spoke of old money. Her eyes, however, were achingly familiar. "Hello, Oren," she said with a slight southern accent that made his name sound like honey. "I'm Catherine Crestwood, Thalia's mother." Mrs. Crestwood. Oren's mind raced. Thalia had mentioned that her parents were flying in from Charleston for Esme's birthday next week, but she'd been notably vague about the details of their visit. "May I come in?" Catherine asked, though it was clearly more of a statement than a question. "I believe we have some things to discuss." "Grandma Catherine," Esme's delighted shriek echoed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of small feet running across hardwood floors. Catherine's stern expression melted instantly as Esme launched herself into her grandmother's arms. "My sweet girl," she said, holding Esme close. "Look how tall you've gotten. I grew 2 whole inches since Christmas, and I can write my whole name now, see?" Esme grabbed a crayon from the counter and carefully wrote Esme on a napkin. "Miss Jennifer says my letters are very good." "Very good writing," Catherine exclaimed with appropriate amazement. "You're getting so smart and grown up." Watching this interaction, Oren felt like an intruder in his own kitchen. Catherine moved through the space with easy familiarity, examining Esme's latest drawings on the refrigerator, commenting on the new books stacked on the counter, asking about school and friends with the practiced ease of someone who had been part of this child's life since birth. "Esme, sweetheart," Catherine said after a few minutes, "would you go to your room and find that special book we brought you from Charleston? I want to show it to your father." "Okay." Esme skipped off happily, leaving the 2 adults alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt charged with unspoken tension. Catherine turned to face Oren fully, and her expression had shifted back to the polite steel he'd seen at the door. "She's remarkable," she said simply. "Intelligent, kind, resilient. Everything a grandmother could hope for in a granddaughter. She is," Oren agreed, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Thalia has done an extraordinary job raising her alone," Catherine continued, "under circumstances that would have broken a lesser woman." The criticism was subtle but unmistakable. Oren felt his defenses rising. "Mrs. Crestwood, if this is about my daughter calling me at 2 in the morning, crying so hard she could barely speak," Catherine interrupted, her voice quiet but fierce. "This is about watching a brilliant, vibrant young woman convince herself that she wasn't worth fighting for. This is about a little girl who spent her first 2 years asking why other children had daddies and she didn't." Each word landed like a physical blow. Oren had known intellectually that his leaving had caused pain, but hearing it described by someone who had witnessed the aftermath, who had held Thalia while she cried and helped her rebuild her life from the wreckage he'd left behind, it made the abstract concrete in a way that took his breath away. "I know I hurt them," he said quietly. "I know leaving was wrong. I'm trying to make up for it now." "Are you?" Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Or are you trying to ease your own guilt by playing house for a few months before your conscience clears and you disappear again?" "That's not what this is," Oren said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I love them. I love my daughter, and I love Thalia. I'm not going anywhere." "Love," Catherine repeated as if the word left a bitter taste in her mouth. "You loved them 4 years ago too, right up until the moment you decided love wasn't enough." The front door opened and Thalia's voice called out, "Mom, I saw your rental car outside." She appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped short, taking in the tense tableau before her. "What's going on?" "I was just getting acquainted with Oren," Catherine said smoothly, but Oren could see the concern in Thalia's eyes. "Mom, we talked about this," Thalia said, moving to stand beside Oren in a gesture of solidarity that surprised him. "You promised you'd give him a chance." "I'm giving him a chance to explain why I should trust him with my daughter's heart again," Catherine replied. "Or my granddaughter's, for that matter. Because I'm not the same man who left," Oren said, finding his voice again. Because I've learned that success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. Because I'd rather fail at everything else than fail at being the father Esme deserves, and the partner Thalia deserves. Pretty words, Catherine said. But I heard pretty words 4 years ago too. At your wedding when you promised to love and cherish my daughter in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. How did that work out? Mom, Thalia's voice carried a warning, but Catherine wasn't finished. Did you know, she continued, her gaze fixed on Oren, that Thalia worked 3 jobs during her pregnancy? Freelance legal consulting, tutoring law students, and weekend shifts at a coffee shop, because the man who promised to provide for her had disappeared and she was too proud to ask for help from her parents. I didn't know, Oren whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. Did you know that she went to every doctor's appointment alone? That she assembled the crib by herself, read parenting books at midnight and practiced breathing exercises with no one to hold her hand? Mom, stop, Thalia said firmly, but Catherine was beyond stopping. Did you know that when Esme was born, 6 hours of labor, no complications, the first thing Thalia said wasn't, is she healthy, or is she beautiful? It was, does she look like him? Because even after everything, even after you'd broken her heart and disappeared without explanation, she still wanted our granddaughter to have a piece of her father. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Esme's footsteps overhead and the distant hum of traffic outside. Oren felt as though the ground had opened beneath his feet, revealing depths of pain and consequence he'd never fully comprehended. I can't change what I did, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't go back and be there for Esme's birth, or hold Thalia's hand during labor, or help her assemble the crib. I can't undo 4 years of absence or take away the hurt I caused. All I can do is promise that every day from now on, I'll be the man they need me to be. Promises are easy to make and easier to break, Catherine replied. What guarantee do I have that you won't run again the moment things get difficult? None, Oren admitted. Except this. 4 years ago, I left because I was afraid of failing them. Now I'm here because I'm more afraid of not trying. 4 years ago I thought protecting them meant staying away. Now I know it means staying close no matter how hard it gets. Catherine studied his face for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Esme adores you, she said finally. Do you know what that means? It means I'm responsible for her happiness. It means you have the power to destroy her, Catherine corrected sharply. Children love unconditionally, completely. If you let her down, if you disappear from her life again, you won't just be breaking a promise to a woman. You'll be teaching a little girl that the people who claim to love her can't be trusted. I know, Oren said quietly, and I swear to you, on everything I hold dear, that I will never let that happen. Grandma, I found the book. Esme's voice carried down the stairs, followed by the thunder of small feet on hardwood. She burst into the kitchen holding a leather-bound photo album, her face bright with excitement. It's pictures of Mama when she was little like me. Catherine's expression softened again as she took the album from Esme. That's right, sweetheart. I thought your daddy might like to see what Mama looked like when she was your age. As Esme climbed into Catherine's lap and began turning pages, pointing out pictures and telling stories she'd obviously heard many times before, Oren caught Thalia's eye across the kitchen. She was watching her mother and daughter with an expression of love so pure it made his chest ache. This was what he'd missed. Not just the big moments, but these quiet Saturday mornings filled with burnt pancakes and family stories and the easy intimacy of people who had loved each other through everything. He'd given up paradise because he'd been too afraid to fight for it. But he was fighting now. And for the first time since Catherine had appeared at his door, he thought maybe, just maybe, it might not be too late to win it back. The Seattle Children's Museum was alive with the controlled chaos of a 4-year-old's birthday party. Balloons bobbed from every available surface, and the air was filled with the delighted shrieks of children discovering the wonders of the water table exhibit. Esme, resplendent in a purple dress that matched her now-healed arm, was holding court near the gift table, her face glowing with birthday joy. Oren stood at the edge of the celebration, watching his daughter, 4 years old today, distribute pieces of elephant-shaped cake to her friends with the serious concentration of a diplomat negotiating world peace. 6 months ago, he hadn't known she existed. Now, watching her blow out candles and make a wish with eyes squeezed tight, he couldn't imagine a world without her laughter echoing through it. She wished for a pony, Thalia said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of punch. Same thing she's wished for since she learned what ponies were. Maybe we should consider it, Oren replied, accepting the cup gratefully. There's that stable outside the city that offers riding lessons. We? Thalia raised an eyebrow, but there was amusement in her voice rather than challenge. Before Oren could respond, Catherine appeared with Esme in tow, the birthday girl clutching a large wrapped box. "Sweetheart, this one is special," Catherine announced. "It's from your daddy." Esme's eyes widened as she accepted the box, which was almost as big as she was. The room fell quiet as other parents and children gathered around to watch her unwrap what was clearly the main event. "It's heavy," Esme grunted, trying to lift it. "Here, let me help," Oren said, kneeling beside her. Together they peeled away the wrapping paper to reveal a beautiful wooden dollhouse, not the plastic kind from toy stores, but a handcrafted masterpiece with working lights, tiny furniture, and extraordinary attention to detail. "Oh," Esme breathed, her hands hovering over the miniature house as if she was afraid to touch it. "It's the most beautiful thing in the whole world." "Look inside," Oren said softly. Esme carefully opened the front of the house, revealing rooms filled with tiny furniture, miniature books, even a small elephant that looked remarkably like Peanut sitting on a tiny bed. But it was the little family of dolls in the living room that made her gasp. A man, a woman, and a little girl with dark hair. "It's us," she whispered, looking up at Oren with wonder. "It's our family." "That's right," Oren said, his voice thick with emotion. "A family that stays together." Catherine, who had been watching this exchange with careful attention, moved closer. "Did you make this yourself?" she asked, examining the craftsmanship with obvious surprise. "I had help," Oren admitted. "There's a woodworker in Belltown who specializes in custom pieces. But I designed it. Every room, every piece of furniture. I wanted it to be perfect for her." "The detail is extraordinary," Catherine murmured, running her finger along the tiny baseboards. "This must have taken months." 3.5 months, Oren confirmed. "I started it the day after she broke her arm. I wanted to give her something that would last, something that would remind her that some things, some people, are built to stay." Thalia had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she knelt beside Esme in the dollhouse. "Sweetheart, what do you think the family is doing in their living room?" Esme studied the tiny figures seriously. "They're having a meeting," she announced. "The daddy is telling the mama and the little girl that he loves them and he's sorry he was away for so long." The words hit the assembled adults like a physical force. Several other parents shifted uncomfortably, sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. But Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible. "And what does the mama say?" Thalia asked gently. "She says she forgives him," Esme replied matter-of-factly, carefully adjusting the tiny female figure. "Because forgiveness is what families do. That's what you told me when I broke your favorite mug, remember? You said families forgive each other because love is stronger than mistakes. The simplicity of it, the pure, uncomplicated wisdom of a 4-year-old, broke something open in the room." Oren felt tears threatening for the first time since the airport 6 months ago. "Daddy?" Esme looked up at him with those warm brown eyes that were so like her mother's. "Are you sad?" "No, sweetheart," he managed. "I'm happy. I'm so happy I get to be here for your birthday." "Will you be here for my next birthday too?" she asked, with the directness that only children possessed. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And the one after that and all the ones after that until you're old enough to not want your daddy at your birthday parties anymore. I'll always want you at my parties," Esme declared with 4-year-old certainty, "even when I'm 100. The party continued around them, but Oren was only dimly aware of the other children playing, the other parents chatting. His entire world had narrowed to this moment. His daughter's joy, Thalia's soft smile, and even Catherine's grudging nod of approval as she examined the dollhouse. Later, as they were packing up the gifts and deflated balloons, Catherine approached him again. The museum was nearly empty now, just their small family group and a few stragglers finishing up in the gift shop. "The dollhouse," she said without preamble. "It's not just a toy, is it?" "What do you mean?" "It's a promise. A very expensive, very public promise." Catherine's voice was thoughtful rather than accusatory. "You're telling everyone, including my daughter, that you see a future here, a permanent one." "Yes," Oren said simply. "I am. And if that future doesn't materialize, if things get complicated again or your business demands your attention, or you decide that playing house was just a phase, then I'll have failed at the most important thing I've ever attempted," Oren replied. "And I'll deserve whatever consequences come with that failure." Catherine studied his face for a long moment. "You know, I hated you for 4 years. she said conversationally. Completely, utterly hated you for what you did to my daughter. You had every right to. I did, and part of me still does. She paused, watching as Esme showed Thalia how the tiny lights in the dollhouse worked. But watching you today, seeing how you look at them, I'm beginning to think maybe hatred is a waste of energy that could be better spent elsewhere. Does that mean? It means you get a chance, Catherine interrupted. One chance. Not because you've earned it, but because they deserve to be happy. And if that happiness includes you, then I suppose I can learn to live with it. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was hope. And for now, that was enough. Daddy, look! Esme called from across the room where she was carefully arranging the tiny family in the dollhouse kitchen. They're having dinner together just like we do. Aaron walked over and knelt beside her, marveling at how she had positioned the figures around the miniature table with such care. They look happy, he observed. They are happy, Esme confirmed, because the daddy came home and said he was sorry, and now they're all together again. Is that what you wish for? Aaron asked gently. For all of us to be together? Esme nodded solemnly. Every night when I say my prayers, I ask for a pony and for all of us to live in the same house, and for you and Mama to be happy like the mamas and daddies in my storybooks. Aaron's throat tightened. Esme, sweetheart, grown-up feelings are complicated. Sometimes people love each other, but do you love Mama? Esme interrupted with 4-year-old directness. Yes, he said without hesitation. Very much. And Mama loves you. I can tell because she gets the same happy face when you come over that she gets when we have ice cream for breakfast. Despite everything, Aaron smiled. Does Mama let you have ice cream for breakfast? Only on special days, Esme said conspiratorially, like when it's snowing or when she's really happy about something. Esme, Thalia called from across the room. Time to pack up. We need to get home so you can call Grandpa and Grandma Johnson to thank them for your present. As they gathered the last of the party supplies, Aaron found himself alone with Thalia for a moment. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me be part of this, for letting me be part of her life. You don't have to thank me for that, Thalia replied. She's your daughter too. She deserves to have her father at her birthday party. I mean all of it. The hospital, the dinners, the way you've let me into her world without making me feel like an intruder. I know it can't have been easy. Thalia was quiet for a moment, watching as Esme carefully placed the dollhouse family back in their living room. It wasn't easy, she admitted, but it was right. And maybe some things are worth being difficult for. Thalia, not tonight, she said gently but firmly. Tonight is about Esme and her birthday and making her happy. But soon we need to talk, really talk, about what this is, what we want it to be, and whether we're brave enough to try again. Aaron nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution, even as his heart yearned for certainty. They had come so far in 6 months, but there were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt, and futures to be decided. But as he watched his daughter carefully close the dollhouse and whisper goodnight to the tiny family inside, Aaron felt something he hadn't experienced in 4 years. The absolute certainty that whatever those conversations brought, whatever decisions had to be made, he was exactly where he belonged. The little girl who had once been a stranger was now the center of his universe. The woman he had loved and lost was slowly, carefully, learning to trust him again. And for the first time since that rainy afternoon 4 years ago, Aaron believed in second chances. Daddy, Esme said sleepily as he carried her to the car, the dollhouse carefully secured in his other arm. This was the best birthday ever. I'm glad, sweetheart, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Sweet dreams. I love you, Daddy, she whispered, already half asleep against his shoulder. I love you too, baby girl, he whispered back, more than all the stars. And as they walked out into the Seattle evening, Aaron knew that whatever came next, those words would always be true. Some promises, once made, could never be broken again. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Craftsman house on Meridian Avenue, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors that Esme had learned to navigate on her new bicycle just last week. The walls were painted a warm sage green now, the same color as the exterior, and family photos covered every available surface. Esme's first day of kindergarten, their camping trip to Mount Rainier, last Christmas morning when she discovered the real pony grazing in Rebecca's backyard. Aaron stood at the stove, successfully flipping pancakes this time, while Esme sat at the kitchen island helping Thalia sort through wedding invitations. The gold band on his left ring finger caught the light as he worked, still new enough to feel foreign, familiar enough to feel right. "This one has flowers," Esme announced, holding up an invitation with delicate watercolor blooms around the edges. "Aunt Rebecca will like this one because she has flowers in her garden." "That's very thoughtful," Talia said, making a note on her list. "What about this one for Uncle Marcus and David?" The wedding was still 3 months away, but Esme had appointed herself chief consultant on all matters of decoration, menu selection, and guest seating arrangements. She took these responsibilities seriously, approaching each decision with the same focused concentration she brought to her kindergarten homework. "Daddy?" she called without looking up from the invitations. "Can Peanut be the ring bearer?" "I think ring bearers are supposed to be people, not elephants," Oren replied, sliding a perfect golden pancake onto her plate. "But Peanut is very responsible," Esme argued. "He never loses things, and he's been to lots of important events." "That's true," Thalia agreed solemnly. "Remember when he came to my job interview at the university? He was very professional." 6 months ago, Thalia had accepted a position as Associate Professor of Environmental Law at the University of Washington, a dream job that allowed her to teach, research, and still maintain the work-life balance that had become precious to all three of them. The transition had been seamless, partly because Oren's Seattle office had grown from a satellite location to the primary headquarters of Maddox Energy Solutions' new Pacific Northwest division. "Fine," Oren conceded with mock seriousness. "Peanut can be the ring bearer, but he has to wear a tuxedo." "Elephants don't wear tuxedos, Daddy," Esme giggled. "That's silly. Then how will people know he's important?" "Because he'll be carrying the rings for when you and Mama promise to love each other forever and ever," she replied with 5-year-old logic that brooked no argument. Thalia met Oren's eyes across the kitchen island, and the look that passed between them was rich with shared memory. The proposal had happened 6 months ago, on a quiet Sunday morning much like this one. No grand gestures or elaborate planning, just Oren getting down on one knee while Esme built a fort out of couch cushions in the living room, his voice shaking as he asked if Thalia would be willing to try forever one more time. "I want to marry you," he had said. "Not because I think it will fix what I broke, but because I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you and Esme in it. I want to grow old with you. I want to help Esme with her homework and teach her to drive and walk her down the aisle someday. I want to be the man you both deserve every single day for the rest of my life." Thalia's answer had been immediate and sure. "Yes, but we're doing this right this time. No running, no secrets, no putting work before family. We're all in, or we're not in at all." "All in," he had promised, slipping his grandmother's ring onto her finger, while Esme cheered from her blanket fort, now watching his daughter debate the merits of different invitation fonts with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Oren marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The man who had once measured success in quarterly profits and market share now found his greatest achievements in perfect pancakes and homework help, and the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through their home. The Seattle office was thriving. They had just landed a major contract with the city for renewable energy infrastructure, but Oren's definition of thriving had evolved. Success now meant being home for dinner every night, never missing a school performance, and building a company culture that prioritized family alongside profit. "Daddy, you're burning the pancakes again," Esme observed with the patience of someone who had witnessed this particular mistake many times. "Right," Oren said, quickly flipping them. "Good catch. I'm going to teach my children to cook properly," Esme announced with 5-year-old confidence, "so they don't have to eat burnt food." "Your children?" Thalia raised an eyebrow. "You're 5 years old, sweetheart. You have plenty of time before you need to worry about children." "I know, but I want to be prepared, like how you and Daddy prepared for me by learning how to be good at loving each other." The simple profundity of the statement hit both adults simultaneously. Esme had grown up watching them rebuild their relationship, learning by example that love was work as well as joy, that families required tending and nurturing and daily choices to show up for each other. "Is that what you think we did?" Oren asked gently. "Learned how to be good at loving each other?" Esme nodded seriously. "At first you didn't know how. That's why you went away. But then you practiced. Like when I practiced piano. And now you're really good at it." "What made you realize we were good at it?" Thalia asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective on their journey. "Lots of things," Esme said, counting on her fingers. "You hold hands when you think I'm not looking. You bring Daddy coffee when he's working late. Daddy sings to you when you're doing dishes, and you both get the same happy face when we're all together." She paused, then added with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from children when adults least expected it. "But mostly because you chose each other again. Even though it was scary and hard, you chose our family." Oren felt his throat tighten with emotion. In her innocent way, Esme had identified the heart of everything they'd built together. Choice. Not the desperate passion of their first marriage, not the obligation of shared parenthood, but the daily, deliberate choice to love each other through uncertainty and fear, and the messy complications of blending their lives together. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Through the front window, Oren could see Catherine's silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. "Grandma Catherine!" Esme shrieked, abandoning the wedding invitations to race toward the door. Catherine's relationship with Oren had evolved into something approaching genuine fondness, though she still occasionally reminded him, with southern politeness and surgical precision, that he was on probation for life. She had moved to Seattle 6 months ago, officially to be closer to her granddaughter, unofficially to keep a watchful eye on the family's reconstruction. "Good morning, my darling girl," Catherine said, as Esme launched herself into her grandmother's arms. "Are you ready for our adventure today?" Saturdays had become grandmother-granddaughter adventure days. Trips to the farmer's market, art classes at the community center, or elaborate tea parties that required formal dress and proper etiquette. Catherine had thrown herself into grandmotherhood with the same intensity she brought to everything, spoiling Esme shamelessly while simultaneously teaching her the kind of grace and confidence that could only come from being unconditionally loved. "We're planning the wedding," Esme announced, "and Peanut is going to be the ring bearer, and I'm going to wear a dress with flowers, and there's going to be a cake with 3 layers. "How wonderful," Catherine said, though her eyes found Oren's across the room. "I'm sure it will be a beautiful celebration." The wedding planning had become a family affair, with everyone contributing ideas and opinions. Rebecca was handling the flowers, Marcus was catering, and Esme had very strong feelings about everything from the color of the tablecloths to the flavor of the cake. Even Catherine had offered to help, a gesture that Oren understood was her final stamp of approval on their union. "Are you ready to go, sweetheart?" Catherine asked Esme. "The pottery studio opens at 10, and we want to get there early to pick the best pieces to paint." "Yes." Esme raced upstairs to get her jacket, leaving the 3 adults alone in the kitchen. "She's remarkable," Catherine said quietly, watching Esme's enthusiastic departure. "Happy, confident, secure. You've done well with her." "We've done well," Thalia corrected gently. "All of us." Catherine nodded, then turned to Oren with an expression that was almost fond. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you came back. Not because I forgave you, I'm still working on that, but because she needed her father, and you've turned out to be a better one than I expected." "Thank you," Oren said, understanding that this was as close to a benediction as he was likely to get from his future mother-in-law. "Don't let it go to your head," Catherine added with a wry smile. "I'm still watching you." After Catherine and Esme left for their adventure, Thalia and Oren found themselves alone in the quiet house, a rare occurrence that they had learned to treasure. The wedding invitations lay scattered across the kitchen island, tangible proof of the future they were building together. "Are you nervous?" Thalia asked, settling into his arms as they stood by the kitchen window overlooking the garden, where Esme's swing set stood next to the vegetable patch they'd planted together last spring. "About the wedding?" "No." Oren pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "About everything else?" "Terrified." "Everything else? Being the husband you deserve, being the father Esme needs, building something that lasts this time instead of falling apart when things get hard." Thalia turned in his arms to face him, her hands framing his face with gentle certainty. "You know what's different this time?" "What?" "This time we're not trying to be perfect, we're just trying to be present, for each other, for Esme, for all of it." She smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "And you've been present every day for almost 2 years now. Even when it was hard, even when my mother was suspicious and Esme was challenging and work was complicated, you stayed." "I'm going to keep staying," Oren promised, the words carrying the weight of every mistake he'd made and every lesson he'd learned. "Whatever comes, job changes, family crises, Esme's teenage years, I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Thalia said simply. "That's why I said yes. That's why I'm not afraid anymore." They stood there in their kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of family life, holding each other in the golden morning light. Outside, Seattle was waking up. Neighbors walking dogs, coffee shops opening, children riding bicycles down tree-lined streets. Their life was ordinary now in the best possible way, filled with the small daily miracles that Oren had once been too busy to notice. His phone buzzed with a text from Miranda, who had relocated to Seattle along with the company headquarters. Reminder, you have the Thompson Industries call at 2 p.m. Also, Esme left her art supplies in your office again. Work? Thalia asked, noting his smile as he read the message. Work, he confirmed. But it can wait. I have more important things to do today. Such as finishing these wedding invitations with my fiancé, and picking up our daughter from her pottery adventure, and maybe taking both my favorite girls out for ice cream to celebrate another perfectly ordinary Saturday in our perfectly ordinary life. Ice cream for lunch? Thalia raised an eyebrow in mock scandal. Sometimes the best celebrations are the ones you don't plan, Oren replied, pulling her closer. Besides, I think we've earned the right to have ice cream whenever we want. As if summoned by their conversation, Esme's voice echoed from the front porch. We're back, and I made you a wedding present. She burst through the front door with Catherine trailing behind, holding a small ceramic bowl painted with lopsided hearts and flowers. Her face was streaked with paint and glowing with pride. It's for your rings, she announced, presenting the bowl with ceremonial seriousness. So you never lose them. Because rings are promises, and promises are the most important things in the whole world. Oren knelt down to accept the gift, marveling at the pure joy radiating from his daughter's paint-smudged face. It's perfect, he said, and meant it completely. It's the most beautiful ring bowl I've ever seen. Will you use it every night? Esme asked hopefully. Every single night, he promised. And every morning when we put our rings back on, we'll remember how much you love us and how lucky we are to be your parents. As evening settled over Seattle, the four of them gathered in the living room for their traditional Saturday movie night. Esme had chosen a story about elephants, her current obsession, and was curled up between Oren and Thalia on the couch, Peanut clutched securely in her arms. Daddy, she said during a quiet moment in the film, do you think the baby elephants in the movie know how much their mama and daddy love them? I think they do, Oren replied, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. Love like that is hard to miss. Good, Esme said with satisfaction. Everyone should know they're loved like that. As the credits rolled and Esme dozed between them, Thalia reached for Oren's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, wedding rings catching the soft light from the television screen. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For coming back. For staying. For giving us this. Oren looked around their living room, at the family photos covering the walls, at his daughter sleeping peacefully between them, at the woman who had forgiven him for the unforgivable, and taught him that love was both more fragile and more resilient than he'd ever imagined. Thank you, he whispered back, for letting me come home. Outside, Seattle settled into evening quiet, and inside their sage-green house on Meridian Avenue, a family that had been broken and rebuilt learned once again that the best promises were the ones you kept one day at a time, one choice at a time, one perfectly ordinary moment at a time. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Others end with sleeping children and held hands and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will bring more chances to choose love over fear, presence over absence, family over everything else. This was one of the second kind. Would you have found the courage to rebuild a broken family? Or would fear have kept you from taking the risk? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.